The word is Thunderbird, Dr. Fuller.
Good morning, Mr. Brown. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I've got us a little little treat for this morning.
Oh, good.
A long time ago, I did a show dedicated to memes. This was like, I think Elon Musk had posted something like, they showed the alien invasion, like they're coming for our memes. Anyway, I didn't do memes so much as I did just kind of some clippings from the news, and we'll kind of tiptoe through a few of them. Most of them, I'm sure anybody that's awake in the 21st century have seen some of these things, but maybe not. I think they merit a conversation with Dr. Fuller.
Oh, I look forward to it, sir. I always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, same here, man. A couple. So if you don't know us, we're waiting for folks to jump on. Dr. Fuller is a retired FBI agent with more than 20 years of service. Before that, he was an Army Infantry officer and EOD officer, a veteran of the Gulf War, and with your old pal Rich Brad. Not that we were in the same unit, but we're in the same plot of land, I'm sure. He now has the Horus Group, and I have links to everything about Dr. Fuller in today's show notes. You can pick up his books, one of which I see right behind you, Dr. Fuller, No Safe Alternative.
Yeah, I think I've got all three of them up there somewhere. I'm just not sure they're all on.
There, I see it. Below that is Empathy for the Devil, and above that, Painting Over Rust. Look at that.
See how clever I am?
And there's the BIVA Award that you won for, was it No Safe Alternative?
It was, yeah. That was kind of a surprise on that one, but I was a pleasant surprise. So that's on prominent display. I tried putting it in the kitchen to see if I could get me out of having to do housework, but no joy.
Joy, I hate that. Don Bothwell is on. He says, good morning from a snowy northwest Montana. Don, I am so envious. Look forward to getting back up there and breaking bread with you again, my friend. Ted Leonard is on. Coin number 1461. Wish all a great day and week. Guys, if you want to find out if becoming a coin member of our self-preservation community is the right decision for you and your family, then you can click the links in today's show notes. Take a 14-day free test drive. If you like what you see, stick around and continue to learn. And without much further ado, Dr. Fuller, I'm not sure if you had seen this. Breaking, Senator Lisa Murkowski says she won't vote to approve any of President Trump's nominees unless they're properly vetted by the FBI with extensive background checks. Now, and I believe Senator Murkowski is a Republican, and she is going to do all she can to block the mandate of the people. What do you think about that, Dr. Fuller?
Okay, here comes the political posturing we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it threatened by all sides, and this, like it or not, it raises her profile, right? And I'm sure that's what she's doing here. There are a whole lot of ways for the leadership in the House and the Senate to force people to bend them to their bidding, and it basically boils down to a negotiation, right? So you carrot and stick approach.
What does she hope to accomplish by going against the will of her party and the will of the people?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I was just saying, Dr. Fuller, what does she hope to gain by going against the will of the American people, the mandate that has been clearly passed to the Republican Party? What does she hope to gain from that? I mean, I know that's hard to answer, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, none of it, I always laugh when people say, oh, the will of the people. Right? The American people want, the American people deserve. They don't care. Right? They really, honestly, don't care about what the American people want. At best, you can hope that they care about what their constituents want, which is a much smaller group of folk. Right? I mean, it's a relatively small number of people in New York that inflicted Ocasio-Cortez on the nation. It's not about the American people and what they want. It's what that individual senator thinks will get them reelected. Right? And who knows what backroom wheeling and dealing she's involved with, right? I don't know what her personal motivations are. I haven't studied her like I would have when I was up on the Hill. But I promise you, this raises her profile. Now she's seen as an outlier. It's going to bring Democrats knocking on her door. Hey, we want to do this, to do that. Maybe, so now they're offering her whatever it is that, tickles her fancy. The Republicans are going to threaten and as well as offer, hey, look, how about I put you on this committee? How about I put you here? How about so there will be offers.
Quid pro quo, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it's politics, right? It's the making of the sausage, right? You don't want to look too closely. So if I were to guess, which is pretty much what I'm doing here, I'd say she wants something, and this is her way of raising her profile and getting it.
That makes sense.
So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she's competing to be the next Liz Cheney. Who knows?
Maybe. I mean, and that worked out so well for Miss Cheney.
Yeah.
So
As a private civilian now.
Right. I mean, and look, this is my point, right? There's a carrot and there's a stick. Okay, get on board, or you get the stick. And so, I mean, the president really has to go and figure out who the leaders. Well, it doesn't have to figure out. He knows who the leaders are in the House and the Senate, and that's who he has to deal with, assuming that the leader can control their people. And then it's up to the leader, the Senate Majority Leader, to then get his people in line, and he'll do that by hook or by crook.
Yeah, and I don't have much confidence in the Senate Majority Leader, the Senator Thull. I don't, whatever his name is, I little or no confidence in he's going to bring apart any of the mandate, at least Rich Brown's mandate, to do a little disruption. But Alan Kelly says she's a rhino only for her gain. Don Bothwell says we're stuck in the left-right Republican Democrat paradigm. They're all part of the political industry, and he adds emphasis on the word industry, and that's a beautiful way of saying it. They will all serve the deep state swamp because that's how they make their money. Yeah, there's still been no investigation in my mind as to how Pelosi and some of her ilk have been able to amass hundreds, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on a salary of what, 150 to 250. I mean,
but it's not hard to figure out. It really isn't. I mean, what they're doing is legal. It's just not, in my mind, it's not moral or ethical. It's not right.
Right.
Like you say, you go get a job that pays a couple $100,000 a year. That's not a bad gig, even in today's economy. But there's a reason people stay up on that hill for 40, 50 years if they can. Just get rich, you get loaded, you get power. I mean, it appeals to fewer and fewer people because of the process to get in there. But those that it does appeal to don't tend to be the best and the brightest.
No.
I'm not saying they're stupid. They're just not necessarily motivated in the best interests of the nation at large. If those interests align with their interests, then sure. But if they don't, well, they don't.
For those of us outside the political industry, to borrow Don Bothwell's term, I think it's an interesting one. I think where I'm going with this is it seems like there's two visions for a future. And I would have never, in my 20s, when I started voting at 18 until the last, 6 or 8 years, I wouldn't have said that. I would say we're all Americans. It's just like, there's, and then now I think there's, and this next one I'm going to bring up here is exactly what I'm talking about. I don't understand where these people are coming from. And this, of course, MSNBC quickly changed the headline of this, but the legal analyst said, Laken Riley's killer never stood a chance. For all the political controversy surrounding Jose Ibarra, the outcome of this trial was never in doubt. And I read the article because I want to make sure I understand exactly what you're saying, that this wasn't some sort of lapse in proper grammar here. No, it was absolutely the tone and tenor of the article. Did you happen to read that one, Dr. Fuller? I
didn't read the article because I couldn't get past that headline. I mean, to me, the headline told me everything I would have gleaned from the article.
And you're right.
Look, I'm all for a free trial. I'm all for the adversarial process and the due process clause of the Constitution. Big supporter. But that guy shouldn't have gone to trial, right? And he should have had an attorney that controlled him enough to say, look, buddy, you're guilty of sin. You're going to lose a trial. You need to plead guilty, ask for mercy, and get the lightest sentence you can get. But instead, he becomes a cause celeb. And, this poor immigrant just comes to this country trying to better himself and, find a better life for himself and his family. And, in the process, he murdered somebody. And like we were talking about the other day, I don't know how we've gotten to this point where the victims get lost in the sauce, right? why are we not talking about the decedent?
Right.
This murdered citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Not somebody who's broken the laws just to be standing where they were standing. Not somebody that did anything to deserve the fate that befell them. But instead, we're talking about the person that's still alive. Oh, this poor soul, this victim. I don't understand how that paradigm has been shifted. But
No.
it has, and it's a shame. I don't think we're in this rush to be merciful, to be seen as kind and merciful. Okay, but justice isn't just about letting people get away with criminal activity. We seem to forget that a lot of time. When I hear people use justice as a word, a lot of times it seems as though they're using it as a euphemism for let the guy go, and or let him off easy. And I don't get that, because mercy to the criminal is re-victimizing the victim. And others have said it better than I, but I just don't understand how if that's your child that's now dead long before their time, how you can watch the media take up this person's cause and feel, oh, he never had a chance, the poor guy. Really? Like the victim never had a chance. Difference being, he's going to get 3 hots in a cot for the rest of his days, solid medical care. And my child's gone. My child's cold in the ground. I don't see the justice in that.
Nor do I. This is a guy that taxpayers, minding your money, was paying to fly him all over the country, where he was committing a spree of crimes, both in New York and in Georgia, prior to killing Laken Riley. One of the best and the brightest of us out there.
And there's no repercussions for this behavior.
Right.
No downside. So.
And fought 18 minutes for her young life. I mean, anybody that's been on the mats,
that's a fight,
bro. 2 minutes is a long time. 2 minutes is 2 or 3 minutes with somebody that's bigger, stronger, faster than you. That's a lifetime.
It sure is.
And yet this young woman fought for 18 minutes, gouging, scraping, fighting for her young life. I mean, it's enough. I probably need to shut up, or I'm going to break down emotionally, because this is just. This right here is a rallying cry, and whoever this guy is, I'm telling you right now, if I was Laken Riley's father, I'm coming for that legal analyst, and let's find a jury to convict me after I punch your ass in the face.
Yeah, and another segue off of this, of course, is the American Warrior Society's motto: "Fights come and be ready." You look at that and you go, God, she fought like that, fought like a demon for 18 minutes. What if she had pepper spray?
Right.
What if she had just a blue belt in BJJ? What if she had a firearm and a minuscule amount of training in the proper utilization of that weapon? This is an entirely different story, or a non-story.
Yeah. And, we like to think, well, we should all be safe to put on our earbuds and go jogging through a park in America, but that's not the world we live in. I think it's a world we aspire to live in, but it's not the world we live in at this moment. So let's, like you said, let's arm ourselves with knowledge. Let's arm ourselves with the appropriate tools and skill levels necessary to bring the fight to those that attempt to harm us. And before we go any further, Dr. Phil, let me welcome a couple of folks on. Derek is on from North Carolina. Texas vetting. This guy was a member of a foreign prison gang, and he is absolutely right. And did you see the photograph? It's easy to see the photograph of this, but that's not how he looked when he got arrested. He looked like a scumbag does. Don says, mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. Boy, that is so well. Fine Scotsman Adam Smith was.
That's Adam Smith. So how old is that quote?
1700s.
Yeah, I mean, it's several 100-year-old quote, and it hasn't changed.
No, and it won't change. Will Parker's on from Montana, coin number 800. Bill Armstrong out there at Meade Hall. Good to see you, Bill. He says, morning from Oklahoma. If the evidence shows you did the crime like this beyond a reasonable doubt, then your, quote, mercy time is done, especially in a crime like this. Yeah, I mean, we could all rally around the thing of this guy needs swift justice, and sadly he won't get it. Me and you are going to pay $70,000 a year for him to live out his miserable life. And I hope that there is justice in the penal system. When somebody walks up to him and says, "Let me see your papers." "Oh, you're that guy. Yeah, put me in his cell. I got this one."
Yeah, but then again, he's also an experienced criminal, right? He's been around the
right.
block. He's been in a prison gang. He knows how to exist in that environment. And as you know, Rich, that environment is devastating to people like you and I, because we're just not emotionally, physically, mentally prepared to exist in that environment. If you probably better than I, because you have been in that environment, but not on the other side of the bars. That kid, it's no big deal to him. He's like, "Oh wow, this is American prison, vacation time."
Yeah. I was always shocked. I'll tell you, one of my favorite books is, I could say that about some books, but Killing Pablo, man. Those that, Mark Bowden, everybody's probably familiar with Mark Bowden's work.
Black Hawk Down, yeah.
Black Hawk Down, but Killing Pablo, man, was a phenomenal book. And, Pablo Escobar was terrified about going to an American prison. And I don't know why, but I mean, he went to great lengths to avoid that. I mean, he held the country Colombia hostage to change their constitution, built an entire prison for himself to be installed in just because he didn't want to go to American prison. I don't know where that fear came from. It seemed unreasonable to me, but I don't know.
No, you can't control as easily what goes on in American prisons as you can in Colombian prisons. Television notwithstanding. It's just, TV would have you believe that every prison guard everywhere in the country is corrupt and pliable, and it simply isn't the case.
Yep.
Certainly not to the degree that you'll find in places like Colombia at the time that Escobar was doing his thing. And he only stayed in that prison until he didn't want to stay in that prison. He just left.
And then he was gone.
he was there, and then he's like, "Nah, not so much."
And why were they coming for him? Because he was killing people in prison. Let's shift gears a little bit, Dr. Fuller. North Korea expands its plan to making missiles used by Russia and Ukraine, researchers say. North Korea is expanding a key weapons manufacturing complex that assembles a type of short-range missile used by Russia and Ukraine. Researchers at a U.S.-based think tank have conducted based on satellite imagery. So, this is one of those things. We had Rocket Man on the ropes, and then here we are now. We got North Korean soldiers getting bloodied and experienced in the Ukraine. And I don't know if it was me and you discussed this, but you're going to have a crop of NCOs that survive that are going to know how this new asymmetric warfare is fought, and they are going to be a challenge. Where before, I don't think they were. I think a Marine rifle company could probably take on a reinforced battalion, if not an entire regiment, just decimate them. Maybe not now. Maybe not a couple of years in the future. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the Koreans making more missiles and selling to the Russians, that's just good economic sense. All right. I mean, there's a market there, and they can feed it. Why not? It's nothing different than the U.S. did with England during World War II. So I can't fault them for that, taking advantage of that opportunity. That's just smart. But the bigger problem for us is not the depth of North Korean coffers. It's as you pointed out, you're going to end up with experience, right? And we've just come off of 20 years of combat experience in ours. So we have one of the most experienced militaries going for the type of war we fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. But now they're getting more up-to-date experience, and they're fighting American equipment, Western equipment, not run necessarily by Americans and Western Europeans, but they're fighting the gear, and they're getting time under fire, and there's no replacement for that. And yeah, people will get killed and maimed and wounded in the process, but as you point out, some are going to come out of there whole, hale, and hearty, but now with invaluable combat experience that they haven't had in 75 years, right? I mean, they haven't, other than taking pot shots at Americans and South Koreans on the DMZ, they haven't stood up under an artillery barrage. They haven't faced down advancing tanks. They haven't charged hills. They haven't done any of that stuff. They haven't just lived in the field in a combat environment.
Oh yeah,
which you and I both know is that's an achievement all by itself.
Yeah,
and that information is going to come home, right? They're going to update their doctrine. They're going to update their training. They're going to base it on experience and not just what they read in a book. They're going to have a whole new crop of generals with medals going from the top of their shoulders down to their belts, belt lines again, right? And their big hats. Yeah, so that right now it's not huge numbers, but it is numbers, and that could have rippling effects far into the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Craig Holland is on from the UK. Good morning, Craig. How's the dystopian nightmare you guys are putting up with over there? Hope you're doing well, brother. Bill says, I suspect that China is using North Korea as a proxy for their support of Russia while keeping their hands clean. Boy, I agree with that, man. What do you think, Dr. Fuller?
Oh, of course. I mean, why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
It would make no sense not to. Now, they can send bullets and bombs over there all day long, and again, make some money off the Russians. I'd be surprised if we don't see some Chinese advisors, if there's not already Chinese advisors on the ground. I'd be surprised. Chinese trainers teaching them to use whatever Chinese weaponry is being sent over. Liaison officers watching attacks. I mean, it's a time-honored tradition going back hundreds of years.
Bro, the Brits sent an officer over here to ride around with General Lee. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah.
I forget his name, Masterson. But yeah, and he spent, I don't know, a year or so with General Lee and then wrote reports and sent them back. I mean, yeah, like you said, this has been going on forever. And like Jeff says, with technology, they've probably never seen, he's speaking with the North Koreans.
Sure. And they're getting, as much as we're seeing the Ukrainian videos off of drones and whatnot, I'm sure the Russians are doing the exact same thing. And they're educating their troops for future fights. They're educating their doctrine. They're updating things. They're making changes to weaponry. They'd be foolish not to. And there are a lot of things, but they're not complete idiots. And, it's easy for me to look at that and say, okay, this is a good time for them to all get up-to-date experience in the field with fighting Western forces. Maybe you don't need it, but it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, right?
Oh, I think you definitely need it. Will Parker says inoculation of deadly force encounters is a real thing, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that speaks to your part about, being in the field. Spent 4 months in a fighting hole, well, various fighting holes as we moved across the deserts of northern Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure you probably did too, although I think you were mech'd up. So you probably, maybe it was a
great big armored RV, baby.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Sitting on depleted uranium ammunition and water.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know why I'm growing a third arm in my chest.
I haven't figured that out yet.
Let's see. Ted says Trump should not have stated pre-election would stop the killing. My view, it motivated those who claim as long as it takes. Yeah, he has a point. Never show your hand, but that's one of the things he ran on. I mean, so they were bound to do this. Those that want to see this work go on for whatever maniacal reason, and I don't think they're in there twirling their long mustache, but there's incentive structures at play here and powerful interests, and somehow they're getting their way.
Sure. I mean, we're not giving stuff away so much as we're giving them money and then letting them use that money to buy our weaponry.
That's right.
So it's a cynical man would call it money laundering.
Whoa.
Happily, there are no cynics here on this show.
No. Don Bothwell says combat experience, new levels of equipment and nuclear weapons. Now the situation on the Korean Peninsula has dramatically changed. I wonder what Kim has in mind for the future. Well, I don't know. You combine that with that. You combine it with China, the proxy war that I think Will Parker pointed out, and you have an interesting cauldron here. Will Rhodes is on. Says, good morning, Rich and Dr. Fuller from Missouri. Card number 2269. My good friend, Mr. Michael Gentili, is in Southport, man. I saw on his Facebook this morning, he had a sign and it said, don't change Southport. Let Southport change you. And I immediately went, that's what we need to have coming into the southern states. As you come in with your U-Haul smoldering from the wastelands of California, don't try to change Tennessee. Let Tennessee change you. I love that.
Now, we're talking about the Southport in the Carolinas. Is that where he is?
Yes.
Nice little town. I like that.
It is a beautiful town. Craig Holland says there will always be mercenaries to help anyone out. Yeah, in a recent one, a British mercenary was just captured by the Russians. They're showing him off. I saw in the paper this morning, online, I should say, the paper, boy. Just earn those gray hairs this morning. But yeah, have you seen that poor guy?
No, I haven't seen it. I heard something about it, but I haven't seen anything.
Save the last round for yourself, brother. I ain't being taken hostage by Russians. My God. Scott says sometimes the hand you show isn't the hand you intend to play. Interesting.
Well.
Yeah. This is another one I wanted to talk about because I knew this was going to come out. U.S. farm groups want Trump to spare their workers from deportation. Mass deportation could upend a food supply chain heavily dependent on immigrants in the United States illegally. As those may or may not know, I run a construction company, and I can tell you we've had, those of us in the biz have had many conversations about this. And, it's like at some point, is somebody going to be like, hey, can you vouch for these guys? Well, for one, they have an LLC. They're paying taxes. I don't know what their damn legal status is or is not. They barely speak English. The quality of work is fantastic. We tried, this has been pre-COVID. I had a good sense that this group of Masons we kept using were probably illegals, but you couldn't argue with the work. They did hold a Tennessee LLC. They were licensed. They were insured. They were bonded, but I'm like, it was going to be a high-profile job, Dr. Fuller, where they were going to be up on scaffolding, and it was downtown Knoxville, and I'm like, everybody's going to be seeing them, and I just don't want the hassle, right? Even though legally it all probably checked out, I didn't want immigration people pulling them off the scaffold. Let me see your stuff. Let's try to hire some good old-fashioned East Tennessee Masons. This clown showed up in a broke-down car, the only one I could get to call me back. He comes in. He's not licensed. He's not insured. He doesn't have an LLC. He doesn't have anything. His price was 3 times that of the other ones. His work was suspect because I never used him before. So I say all that to say it's not just that industry. It's going to be multiple industries, which is why I like, let's get the criminals out first. We got 1 million something criminals to deal with. Let's get them, and then we'll start worrying about the other folks. And this is what's hurting the right, in my opinion. This is where I'm going to toss the ball to you, Dr. Fuller. At some point, should there be amnesty for somebody who's been in this country a decade, never even got a speeding ticket, raising a family, got an LLC, paying taxes, doing good work, he's a member of the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not the Hosea Biza that's killing and raping people, but people that came here, should there be something for that?
That is a sticky question. And it's a question that's been around, by the way, for decades. I mean, I remember growing up in California, being in Mexican restaurants and watching, a guy run in the front door yelling, "La migra es aquí," and just start yelling, "La migra, la migra," and the whole place cleans out. Not just employees, but other diners. Everybody runs out the back door, and in walks the immigration guy. I remember watching Clinton talking about, we need to straighten out this immigration policy. Obama talked about it. Bush talked about it. I mean, they've all talked about it. But the funny thing is nobody fixes it, right? Mm-hmm. Democrats have control of Congress and the White House. They don't fix immigration. They don't pass laws. They come up with all kinds of policies, but they don't pass any laws. They don't go back and fix the immigration problem. The Republicans, they get in office. They got the House. They got the Senate. They got the White House. They don't fix it. So why do you suppose that would be? Both sides have identified it as a problem. The nation as a whole has very polarized opinions on this, but we all recognize it's a problem. But it doesn't get fixed. Well, of course, it's like so many other things, right? They don't fix it because it's a great way to motivate your base to throw money at you, right? Once they figure out that, okay, hey, Rich Brown is a single issue voter and he votes on the immigration topic, well, all I've got to do now is take a page out of the NRA's book, for example, and say, oh my God, this is the most important congressional fight we've ever had. We're going to lose all our immigrants. We're going to gain a bunch of immigrants. Whatever the hot button issue for you is, that's what they throw at you. Throw us some money quickly. Mm-hmm. And the other side of the issue is doing the exact same thing. Will Parker's absolutely correct with his blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So is it a problem? Clearly it's a problem. You can't have this happen. I mean, you remember when Clinton granted amnesty to millions of people who were here illegally. And now here we are a generation later doing the same thing. So do I think blanket amnesty is a good idea? I don't, because I think it
Encourages.
behavior, right? It encourages this behavior. And oh, by the way, coming across that border, under Biden, it's been pretty safe. But you come across that border illegally, it's no joke.
Right.
People die out there all the time.
Yep.
And, you tend to see the hardy young males survive it because they're hardy and they're young, right? The old women, the old men, the young kids, they're the ones that, don't survive that trip. So I, for one, as a humanitarian issue, don't think you should encourage people to do it, right? Because there's also the trip to the border. Mm-hmm. Once they get in this country, if you simply say, ollie, ollie, oxen free, because it's the easy way to do it, I think you're encouraging that behavior in the future.
Absolutely.
Is it fair that you uproot somebody and send them home? I'll give you an example. One of my best friends in the world, his mother came here illegally, she spoke a smattering of English after 20 or 30 years here. She worked cleaning in a school, in a private Catholic school, to pay his tuition so he could go to that private Catholic school. He went to prep school with me and went on to become an MD, owns a concierge MD medicine or medical internal medicine practice in San Diego. He's bilingual. He was born in the States, so he's fine in terms of immigration status. Phenomenal guy. Would it have been right to uproot her and throw her back over the border? You can make the argument. I think you can have that conversation either way. Personally, I think you can spend as much energy vetting her and helping her get through the process to stay as putting her on a bus and shipping her home. But you're going to need more bureaucracy to do that. You're going to need more people to do that. You're going to have to throw money at the problem to differentiate between this Ibarra guy and someone who is trying to do the right thing. I think philosophically there's a real problem with making the argument that, well, yeah, once they got here, they're great citizens, when the whole process of getting here was committing a felony.
Right.
So I thought Trump's solution in his last presidency was rather inspired, right? Hey, look, you want to come, do it right. We're going to help you out, but stay where you are. Right? Stay in your house, keep your job. We'll get you through the process. And look, you've been to third world countries. I've been to third world countries. I understand why people want to come here. Our slums make some of those third world countries. Our slums look like paradise.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that you can get a job here, like these Masons you're talking about, you get a job, you can utilize your skills, you can make good money relative to what you're used to making, and your work ethic is phenomenal. Yeah. I understand all of that. But we've got to come up with some sort of intelligent solution to this problem. And blanket amnesty is just hitting the easy button. And it's doing what Congress also often does, and just kicks the problem down the road to another Congress to deal with. I find that slothful. And
but the inverse of that is also somewhat slothful, and that is just well, I'll give you an example. So I was having a conversation with two senior officers back at Paris Island, and one of them's name was Colonel Sanchez and Major Beltran, and they're like, it's mass deport them all, and okay, gentlemen, got it. My family, because I'm like, well, how do we do that, sir? And he's like, well, we just stop every damn one, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, your name is Beltran and your name is Sanchez. You married Hispanic women and your children all look like you. I got a carload of blue-eyed white people named Brown. Who's going to get, screwed with every single day? And they're like, I never really thought about that. I'm like, no, because you fought and bled for this country. And you can't, but they look like you. So how do we disentangle this Gordian's knot, to use your metaphor from a week ago?
Yeah, I remember when Captain America, the First Avenger, when that movie came out, there was a scene where they're trying to escape the evil Nazis, and somebody said something about, we taking everybody, and he looks at this obvious Asian fellow, are we taking the unspoken questions, are we taking the Japanese guy? And he looks at the speaker and says, I'm from Fresno. And I think that speaks to your point, right? I mean, it's a difficult situation. I remember a video or a movie back in the 80s, where a guy got scooped up. I think it was a Cheech and Chong film where a guy got scooped up and sent back over the border. And he was, my name's Brandon. He's like, I'm from the States. Yeah, it's not easy. right?
Mhm.
But the difficulty of the task should not be a bar to the attempt,
Mhm.
right? I mean, because again, we're talking about people's lives here.
Right.
And I think what we want in this country are industrious, hardworking people. I have no problem with that.
Mhm.
I do have a problem with you coming here illegally and
Mhm.
then not becoming legal the whole time. And yeah, I'm East LA. There you go. That's Will Parker's comment. Born in East LA. So you've got to address it. You really do. I mean, it's the same with this, the gun violence problem we have in the United States. What we have is a societal breakdown in our inner cities, and we have a violence problem.
Yeah.
And we all know, especially those who are right of center, understand that 100 years ago you could buy a machine gun from Sears and Roebuck.
Right.
No problem. If you had the money, get the machine gun. Nobody was walking into schoolyards with a BAR.
Right.
So that doesn't speak to the gun being the problem. That speaks to the level of violence in our society problem. But no one wants to address that. The easiest thing is let's ban guns. Let's tax them. Let's do whatever we can to shut them down, rather than address the breakdown of the nuclear family, to address the breakdown of societal bonds and norms that prevent these levels of violence, because that is a hard thing to do, and there's no money in it, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's getting paid, nobody's getting sued over something like that. That's just hard work and effort over the course of generations, and that's what it's going to take, I think, to straighten out this immigration problem.
Yeah, and that was my point, because they turned it back on me. Of course, this is 15, 20 years ago. They're like, all right, Rich, well, what do we do? I said, we got to secure the border first. The border's got to be locked down tight, as tight as you're ever going to get it. And then we can decide what we want to do as a country with the people that are here. And it may be mass deportation, but as long as you got a porous border, man, all this, you're sticking your finger in the dike, man. It's absolutely doing nothing.
Right. And I don't think any of us want the image of the Berlin Wall running from the Pacific to the Gulf of Mexico. Nobody wants that. We don't want mines and dogs and all that silly crap. But you can't have a porous border. If you don't have borders, you don't have a country. I mean, it's just that simple. And as we've talked about before, you just don't know who's coming through. And yeah, let's even say 99% of the people coming in are good, honest, hardworking people seeking a better life for them and children. It's that 1% that goes out and kills people. I'm not saying those percentages are accurate. I'm just saying, even if it's that thin a percentage of people that are coming across the border, when you're talking about millions of people crossing that border, you're talking about hundreds and thousands of violent criminal actors.
Yes.
And honestly, if I am a nation state actor with ill intent towards the United States, this is a godsend for me to put sleeper agents into your country, right? I mean, I'm going to run my spies into your country, my military age males into your country and females, and you're going to not just let them come in, you're going to give them housing, you're going to give them phones. I don't even have to fund this process. You're going to do it.
That's Jesus, I never thought about it that way. You're absolutely right. Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, so now it's not just, okay, the Russians and the Chinese can do it because they can afford to fund it. Now it's, the North Koreans can just send people over. We'll call you when we need you. So it's national suicide. It is an existential threat, and it needs to be addressed. But my guess is what we'll see is the same thing we've always seen. They'll stick the finger in the dike. They'll put a Band-Aid on the owie. They won't treat the disease. They'll treat the symptoms. And the band plays on.
And the band plays on. Bill says to have a nation, you need an actual border and a primary / singular culture. Homogenous is a must. Yeah, I think that's another lie the left has told, and that is diversity is our strength. I absolutely no culture that's just not true. I mean, absolutely prove it's not right.
So many other things where it's only half a statement, right? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I have all kinds of friends who are firearms instructors that hate that phrase. And I'm like, look, if you put no more thought into it than just to spout that pithy statement, then yeah, it's a bad statement. But it feeds into the idea that if you go slow, you'll get better and you'll be smooth, and that smooth will lead into speed and you will eventually get fast. Diversity is our strength as long as we have a unifying culture for that diversity.
Yes.
Yeah, then it's great. It's absolutely fantastic. But if it's simply, if it's not a melting pot, but it's rather a salad bar, then you don't have a country. You have balkanization. You have cliques. You have little zones of this, zones of these sneetches with stars on their belly, zones of sneetches with no stars on their belly. And that inability to have common ground and a common bond, a unifying culture, then you're going to have conflict. And that conflict is, on occasion, going to devolve into violence. So, yeah, that bond might only goes so far, but it's got to, you got to put some thought into these things.
Yeah, and I'll get to some of the comments here. Bill Armstrong says, and that does not mean only one race, but one culture. We used to have a melting pot, but it was one pot. And Don Bothwell continues that with, sadly, the e pluribus is not unum. And of course, e pluribus unum means from many one. And to speak to that, I think we have done such an amazing job with this in the past. My son-in-law, Johnny Weismuller, is a second-generation American. His mother's parents came from Poland. His father's parents came from Hungary, Austria, Romania, wherever over there in Eastern Europe. And but if you talk to him, he will say, when our forefathers fought at Lexington and Concord, well, those were my forefathers. The Browns and all of our other ilk on both sides of my family, my wife's family, we've been here in most cases since the 1600s. I'm a whatever generation American. Don't even know anything. There's nowhere to go. We are here. And then my friend Michael, who's on this morning, his grandfather came here from Italy. I helped him track down the documents where he sailed over at 16 years old and created a life here. And there are so many amazing stories. I've had other friends, and their families came here in the early 20th century, 1920s, most of them. And yet they will tell you with bated breath about how, the Union is holding at Gettysburg and this and that. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about?
And they're not speaking, of course, of bloodlines. They're speaking of cultural forefathers.
This idea, you're right.
I'm an American. I think I've told you this before. My foster family is Japanese. Mom was in Hiroshima a week before it got turned into glass. She married a Nisei soldier that came over as part of the occupation. So his parents had immigrated from Japan to California and had been interned. And he went off and fought. And he ended up retiring from the Army as a major. They named their children. They had 3 children. They named them Ronald, Catherine, and Richard. All difficult words to pronounce to the Japanese tongue, by the way. And they didn't teach any of them to speak Japanese. I spoke as much Japanese as any of them did. And I asked her one time before she passed, why did you do that? Why didn't you teach them English? And she says, because we're Americans. And I wanted my children to be Americans. Now, her name was Sachiko, and her husband's name was Isao. So, you couldn't have gotten more Japanese than these two people. But the idea was, no, she's like, I'm an American, and my kids will be Americans, and they will be as American as I can make them. And they have been. They are as American as you can get. But that was important to her. She wasn't interested in being a Japanese American. She wasn't interested in flying a Japanese flag out in front of the house. That was not her thing, and she was not having it. So
Teddy Roosevelt warned us about hyphenated Americans. Do you remember that speech?
I do remember that. We have no room here for hyphenated Americans.
Yeah. But I agree with that. That is what we need. And I think there are criminals in and amongst the millions of illegal immigrants that are here, but there are also some people that want to be a part of the dream and have risked everything to get here. And I think we need to separate the wheat from the chaff. I'm not saying it needs to be amnesty, because it's not a good way to just start a relationship with somebody like as a felon, but that's what they are. So I don't know what that looks like, but we got to fix it. It's a problem worth solving. I think we'd agree with that.
It is.
500,000 in Gaza threatened by sewage, flood, and rainy season. I'm surprised that Gaza hasn't descended into some cholera hellhole with what's going on there. And Hamas can end it anytime they want, Dr. Fuller. The question is will they?
Well, why would they? This is going to be a recruiting bonanza for them for 100 years. There's no way around it. They are going to take what has happened here. They're going to take these images and they're going to spin them, and people yet unborn are going to spin them and recruit others that are yet unborn. And next thing you know, in 2075, we're going to have suicide bombers in Tel Aviv. And Hamas has long shown that they're not in it for their people. They don't care about the average citizen, right? I mean, if the Israelis put down their guns and go home, drive their tanks home, this war is not over.
That's right.
If Hamas does, the war's over.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And to me, there's a bug in my office here that's flying around my face. To me, you tell a company of Marines, look, if you keep fighting in this town, they're going to flatten the town, and these 1,000 civilians are all going to die. Mm-hmm. And you guys will die eventually too, and you'll take a bunch with you, but you're going to end up killing all these civilians. Or you can surrender, and we'll get you out of here peacefully, and the civilians will live. Very few Marines are going to say, nope, screw the civilians.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to try and get to a place where they can fight, where the civilians aren't is in danger. They're going to get away from them. They're going to try very, very hard to save those American civilians.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they'll jump on grenades for each other. They'll certainly do it to save the civilians.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the culture that they were brought up in. It's the organizational culture. It's true of any branch of the service. I just use the Marines because I know.
Yes, of course.
That's not the case with Hamas. That's not how they see things, right? I mean, we talk about all the time that criminal actors don't see the world the way we peaceful type people see the world. Hamas doesn't see it that way. Hamas understands intellectually, look, if we don't put our headquarters under a hospital, the hospital won't get blown up purposely to get to our headquarters. And they put the headquarters under there anyhow, right? They hide amongst the civilians and let the civilians take the hit. That takes a lot of cynicism. And
but what did Mao say? An insurgent should move through the population as a fish does through water. Mm-hmm. I'm probably butchering the quote, but something about like that.
Right. And look, you're Hamas fighting Israel. Okay, you're not going to win in a straight up fight, right? You're not going to take to the fields of Armageddon and win a pitched tank battle. That's just a non-starter for them. So I understand to a certain degree where you have to hide your guerrillas in and amongst the civilians. But when the civilians are getting pummeled like they're getting pummeled now, it makes no sense whatsoever to keep fighting. It doesn't. And you know who did something like this? I mean, the Nazis in World War II, they were beat, by the end of 43, the writing was on the wall. Everyone knew, hey, it's over. By mid-44, when they had lost the Battle of Normandy, everybody on both sides that had any military sense knew, hey, this is done. We need to surrender this and try to save as much as we can of what's left of our country. But they didn't because there was a lunatic in charge. So I look at what's going on in Gaza now, and I'm like, who's the lunatic?
All right.
Because I promise you, if you came out and said we surrendered, what's the conditions here? Israel, you want all our guns, you want all our drones, you want all your hostages back, done. The Israelis stopped dropping bombs that day. Mm-hmm. Right. And wanting your hostages back, I don't find that to be an unreasonable position.
Right.
40 years of getting attacked by these knuckleheads and having your civilians killed, especially after the October attacks. How are you surprised that this is the response you're getting?
I don't know why Israel hasn't flooded the tunnels. And maybe they haven't. I just haven't heard of it. But to me, it's like you just pump the seawater in, let the thing rise, and the rats will run out. Hopefully, if that don't work, then you fill it full of oil and set it on fire. But I mean, you got to get them out of there because.
But how many of your hostages are down in there, right?
They will but here's the thing, and this goes back to let's show again what we're talking about. They don't care about the people above ground that are dying and suffering, right? Because their leadership is deep underground. They've had that's what they did with all this money that was being funneled to them. Built an amazing tunnel network, hospitals down there. They got cities down there. So as long as the Hamas leadership is chilling, smoking cigars underground, they don't give a shit that their poor people are up there suffering.
No, you're right. And there's such a big problem. Obviously, we've talked about this before, that it's not like Egypt's letting them in, right?
No.
I lived in that
wants to
Sinai
speak.
Desert for a long time. There's a lot of space out there. Right? There's a lot of room for refugee camps. But of course, the Egyptians don't want them in their country because of reasons we've discussed in previous shows that I highly recommend the viewer go back and watch.
Well, since October, I think you and I did a show like on October the 9th, a couple of days after this happened. And we're like, they need to open the Rafah Gate, let them come into Egypt, then you can sort the wheat from the chaff there. And then you just have to deal with the fighters left. And they know Israel knows how to do that really well. Of course, nobody would take these people. The Jordanians wouldn't, the Syrians wouldn't, the Egyptians wouldn't. They know that these people are there. I don't know how to put it kindly.
Yeah. And again, it's eating that bowl of M&Ms, right? You've got 100 M&Ms in a bowl. 5 of them are cyanide laced. How many of those M&Ms are you willing to eat? Right? How willing are you to take that risk? And their Arab brothers, as they've long described themselves, don't want them in their country because they know that it's a problem. And it's a potential problem for a long time. And oh, by the way, it's going to attract Israeli retribution. And all of a sudden now you've got bombs landing in your country.
Mm-hmm. They don't know part of that.
Right. I mean, even think about it. Think about Fallujah. Even then, right, the fighters said, everybody out. The Americans said, if you're not wanting to get in this fight, get out. And people left, and everybody let them leave.
That's right.
Right. Even the Iraqis let them leave. What's going on in Gaza right now?
Mm-hmm.
Either the Hamas won't let them leave or no one will let them out. So, yeah, is it a humanitarian disaster? Of course it is. Do I understand the Israeli position of saying, look, we're just done with this crap? Yeah, I understand that. Do I understand Hamas's unwillingness to, cry uncle?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand that as well. And understanding it doesn't necessarily mean supporting the steps that I see people taking, but I do understand where they're coming from. And Craig Holland asked a great question.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Well, there's a lot of powerful disincentives to that process, not least of which is they'll kill me and my whole family if I cough them up.
And a lot of them believe that cause. I mean,
yeah, there's a lot of support.
To be clear.
And look, carpet bombing German cities didn't break the will of the Germans, right? Carpet bombing half of England and then V1, V2 attacks didn't break the English spirit. Firebombing entire cities in Japan didn't break their spirit, didn't make them sue for peace. These people are embracing their martyrdom. I mean, they also have that religious aspect. In addition to the cultural aspect, they have the religious angle going on. And why didn't people give up members of the IRA and the PIRA? Well, there are a lot of disincentives to that. And not the least of which is they'll come and kill me and my family, my dog, and people that owe me money and burn my house down and grind salt into the earth. So, yeah, it would solve some problems, but it would, for us, not so much for the individuals involved, I think.
Yeah, and what Dr. Fuller's talking about, with the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and the PIRA, the Provisional Irish Republican Army, and they were going up against the Royal Ulster Constabulary and the Ulster Volunteer Force. And if you haven't read, Dr. Fuller and I have read the book Say Nothing, but if you don't want to read the book about the Troubles, I would encourage you. There's a great Hulu series that's just based on the book, and you see what happens to one mother. She's a widowed woman, true story, and she helps a soldier, if I remember correctly. And the IRA sees her help the soldier, and I won't give it away, but it doesn't end well for her and her 10 children. So yeah, the retribution is a real thing. And yeah, they're between a rock and a hard place. And I agree with Israel. Now is the time. If we're ever going to do anything, let's finish it now. But I don't know what finish it looks like until they flood the tunnels, man. And let's get the rats out of there.
Yeah, because what are your choices? You're going to put bodies in there? I mean, that's just going to be a meat grinder.
Oh my God, no.
It's going to be an absolute meat grinder. You're going to those tunnels with your own troops.
I want to back up to something you said too, because I have long been a supporter of strategic bombing, which is, basically blanket carpet bombing a country in submission. And then I read the actual papers from conservative as well as liberal think tanks, and it just doesn't work. You would think it be a great way to bring a country to heel, just firebomb them into oblivion. And it just doesn't work. Now, of course, atomic bombing is a little bit different, but I mean, it strengthened the resolve of Tokyo. It strengthened the resolve of London. There's never been a case where just, sustained strategic bombing has worked that I'm aware of. And I was really shocked by that because it seems like what a great thing to do,
Yeah, in terms of fighting with steel and not flesh, right? Putting bombs on forehead, warheads on foreheads instead of having soldiers go in there and do it. The mathematics work out in your favor.
Mm-hmm.
And the U.S. has spent a lot of time being, not just dominant in the air, but owning the airspace. But you just can't do it. And World War II shows us that very, very clearly. I mean, when you're putting 1,000 bombers over a city and they're dropping hundreds of thousands of pounds of high explosives and incendiaries, and they figured out how to do that, right? You drop the high explosives and knock the buildings down, and then you drop the incendiaries on top of that to set everything on fire. So they figured out how to do it, and they leveled cities. They absolutely leveled cities. Didn't break the will to fight. Killed a lot of people. Dehoused them. That was the euphemistic term. Oh, we're not carpet bombing. We're dehousing critical defense employees. Because now they're trying to work in a factory, and the factory's moderately damaged, but their home burned down. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and then you have the problem of, are you familiar with I think it was a B-24 bomber crew? They had to parachute out of a stricken bomber in late 45 over Japan. It's called the bomber was called the Lonesome Lady. Familiar with this?
No.
So they parachute out and land in Hiroshima, and they're quickly taken. And then this was in July 45, and then in August we drop atomic bombs on them. And I think we knew they were there, but we did it anyway. And some of them survived the initial blast. And if you want to really read a nightmare, read what happened to those bomber crews that were in Hiroshima. One of the kids survived, and they took him and tied him to a post on one of the bridge as the city was burning, and hung a sign around his neck in Japanese, like, I did this, and this is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. And the entire city just descended on him and ripped him to shreds. I mean, that poor guy lived probably one of the worst deaths I could imagine. Here's one singular person for retribution.
Yeah. Oof. And you can see why people would be upset about that, right? I mean,
100%.
And that's, as we've talked about before, war is just a horrid, horrid thing. And there is a very, very brutal mathematical calculation when you look at that and say, look, we're going to kill 100,000, 110,000 people in this city, but it's going to save the lives of millions on both sides. Because if we don't do this and they don't surrender, then we are going to have to invade. And we're going to have to put boots on the ground. And that, judging by Iwo Jima, judging by our experience in Okinawa, is going to be an absolute bloodbath for both sides. And so losing a couple 100,000, mostly enemy personnel, seems like probably not the best phrase, but a solid investment to keep from having to lose millions of more of those civilians and millions of your own people. Mm-hmm. Right? Because let's face it, that's the priority, saving your own troops. And you can have all kinds of ethical conversations about that, but if my government is more interested in spending the lives of Americans than they are in spending the lives of our enemy, I'm less supportive of that decision-making process. So yeah, the use of the nukes back then was a horrible thing, but.
Well, like Will Parker says, war is supposed to be hell, capital Hell. It's supposed to cause leaders pause before sending their treasure. But when you have immoral, corrupt leaders that don't have any skin in the game, they don't even know anybody that's in that blue collar warfighting career. What do they call it? Oh, veterans. It's easy to just send them because they don't know who they are, which I think is always, to me, makes a case for conscription. It's your kids, Senator. There's no deferment. They're going. And I think they would slow down on some of the things. And that's why we opened the show today with, Biden doing what he's done, what kind of a mess it's going to cause. And to that end, let's jump back into what's going on in Ukraine. You can look at it from the fighting that's going on. You know, this morning, Russia air defense systems destroyed 7 Ukrainian missiles overnight in the Kursk region. So they're still firing those missiles even after Russia hit them with whatever ICBMs, or maybe it wasn't, I don't know, but they're hypersonic weapons. And now here we go again. Now are we going to get another round of ICBMs? At this time, are they going to use MIRVs, only with conventional warheads, to strike multiple targets? I don't know, man. I think at some point this is going to get ugly. You know, in Russia, President Putin has signed a law that allows those who sign up to fight in Ukraine to write off unpaid debts worth almost $100,000. So that tells me they're desperate for manpower, Dr. Fuller, but they got plenty of missiles, don't they?
They seem to. And, you know, they still have stockpiles from the Second World War packed away, Cosmoline packed away. So they gear, not necessarily the best gear, but the gear is not going to be the Russians' problem. It's going to be people. And, you know, we've said it before on the show. I've said it before on the show. As long as the Ukrainians don't cross the border, it's going to be very difficult for Putin to ring that, you know, defend the Rodina bell, right? He's not going to be able to invoke the, you know, everybody's got to go because this is an existential threat to our nation. You know,
because once that bell gets rung, they can amass a lot of people.
Sure. I mean, look at World War II again. I hate to keep using this example, but, you know, Stalin didn't, you know, fill his draft quotas with impassioned Russian personnel by appealing to their innate love of communism, right? He didn't say, you know, fight for Karl Marx and his theories. What he said was fight for the motherland. And that motivated people far, far better. I think the same thing will be true with Putin, right? Right now he's the aggressor, and the people in Russia know that. They see that, and they're very, very reticent to die and watch their kids die, you know, trying to expand the Russian borders, try and recreate the CCCP. You know, so that's why I think he's struggling for personnel. It's an unpopular war. And I can almost guarantee that there's a U.S. information campaign within Russia to heighten that ideal. And I'm sure that other Western nations are running the same thing. I'm sure Ukraine is running that same thing. There's psyops going on there that is just going to heighten that discord. But you roll the first Ukrainian tank into southern Russia, problem.
That's what we talked about the other day. You know, Lee should have just, you know, to go back to our American Civil War, should have never invaded Pennsylvania. That was a stupid, hubristic move to do that. Don't do that. Keep your army on the field, keep maneuvering, and keep your currency strong and all that kind of stuff, and wait till you get some acknowledgement from the European powers.
And that was honestly what George Washington, that was his big.
And it worked.
Tactical brilliance and strategic brilliance, right? He was
strategic brilliance because he was tactically not a good tactician.
He was not.
Strategically, he knew keep them alive, keep feeding them, keep paying them.
The big battle he won was never so much in the field as it was at Valley Forge. Right? Just keeping his military alive and on the field, diminished though it was. So yeah, and you know, Lee clearly was drawing from some of the best generals in the U.S. at the time. He could have maneuvered around and done it. I'm preaching to the choir, telling you.
Yeah.
And Zelensky's kind of in the same.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say Zelensky's kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, and we look to him like you know, he's their George Washington or something. This is a guy that suspended elections. He'd probably be voted out of office if he held an election. Like I believe the Ukrainian Constitution says that there's. I mean, say what you want, but you know, Lincoln ran against McClellan. McClellan was going to get peace in our time, to Neville Chamberlain kind of deal. We're going to sue for peace with the Confederate States because he had already got his ass kicked. McClellan had by old Bobby Lee many times and been fired by Lincoln at least twice. He's running against Lincoln, and somehow Lincoln pulls it off and gets reelected. But I want to get to a couple of comments. Don says on Zero Hedge this morning, Ukrainian former top military commander claims World War III has officially begun. Do you buy that, or is that hyperbole?
I don't buy it. I think it is. I mean, considering that it's coming from a Ukrainian, he has a vested interest in widening this war because they need the help. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. Do I think that this could become the beginning of World War III? Certainly. And I fervently hope that leadership on all sides of this conflict and all the nations that might get roped into it see it as such. Say, look, if we're not careful, we are going to end up in World War III. And it's not the World War III of 1940s or 1950s. This is the kind of thing that destroys economies. I mean, you can launch nation crippling attacks over the internet now.
Drone wars, my God, the stuff that, I mean, it is some of the war porn that is coming out of there, man. I watched one this morning where this Russian soldier, he's unarmed. He has no rifle. And he's just got his hands up, and they're just the drone is just kind of coming in and teasing him, and then finally it detonates and kills the guy. And I'm like, man, that is freaking brutal.
So where are we in 50 years? I mean, the stuff of sci-fi when you and I were kids is going to be reality. Yeah. Because if you can make a drone aircraft and a drone ship, and, there's nothing that says you can't make a drone tank.
Where's the honor in that? I mean, it sounds like Patton, there's push button war. No honor in that. There's got to be heroes, again, cowards, and,
It's that calculus again, right? I mean, I'm all for my son dying of old age in his bed long after I'm gone, rather than having him die in a muddy pit in Western Ukraine.
Yeah, 100%.
So, if you can send a drone instead of my boy, screw your honor, right? Mm-hmm. And I understand why Patton would say something like that, because you've got to motivate people to charge machine gun nests.
That's right.
You've got to motivate people to get in a boat, slosh through the ocean, land on the beach, charge a machine gun pit, fight bonsai attacks, fight the Waffen
malaria.
Right. You got to fight disease. You got, if you're a kid from, a small town in Iowa and you find yourself in northern Italy slogging up a mountain, how do you motivate that kid to do that? I mean, what interest does he have in liberating Monte Cassino? He doesn't give a shit. So you got to appeal to things like honor. I mean, look at how much effort the Marine Corps puts into in basic training, instilling that sense of honor and history. Well, there's a reason for that. Beyond, hey, we look good and we throw a party every November. There's a very practical reason to that.
And just to give the casual listener who don't, I know we've got a lot of Marines in this morning, Will Parker, and got other soldiers, Don Bothwell and Bill Armstrong, Semper Fi gents. I mean, they tell you through 13 weeks of recruit training, like every single fiber of that uniform you're wearing, every bit of that fabric was bought and paid for in blood. It's on loan to you. I mean, if you just hear this kind of stuff all the time, and I agree with it, it's in my bones now. I don't disagree with that at all. And
you're part of that, right? You're part of that story lineage.
But we need to do that with Americans, though, Dr. Fuller, right?
Well, we should.
We should, right? So, I mean, because it's one thing to think that as a warfighter, but as another, like, hey, you're an American. Here's what that means, But now America bad is where we're at now.
Right. When you and I were kids, school systems did that because that's where you needed to start. Yes. Right. How did you start every day when you got to class from kindergarten all the way on?
Pledge allegiance
to the flag, right? Every day. And you didn't, a teacher that got up in front of the class and denigrated the nation, denigrated the president, whoever it was, gone, just hammered, right? The school administration would get flooded with it, angry letters from parents. And I'm still in the boat where I'm like, look, don't teach my kid what to think. Teach them how to think. Teach them how to critically think. And, this is my daughter who's, left of center. Growing up, she would always hit me with, well, you disagree with, you think I'm wrong because you're on the right. And I'm like, no, I think you're wrong because you're not thinking. Put some thought into it, be able to defend your position, show me that you've really put some critical thought into this, and I've got your back all day long.
Right.
And eventually that switch flipped with her. And now she got to a point in middle of high school where, if she wanted something, it wasn't just give me. It was give me because. Make your case, kid. And that was partly because of me, and it was partly because of the educational system she was in. I worry now that our educational system is not supporting that to the degree that I think is appropriate.
That's so awesome. I did the same thing as a leader on recruiting. We have a module for how to handle indifference. And let me be clear. Nobody wants to join the military. So you need to be able to handle that indifference. Well, there's skill steps to handle the indifference. So when my Marines would say like, "Hey, Gunny, I need to go get a haircut," I'm like, "Not interested." Like, you're not interested in me getting a haircut, Gunny? I'm like, no, I could care less. And like, okay, Gunny, I see what you're saying here. So maybe you're not interested now. Maybe you will be in the future. Can I ask you a couple basic questions? And I'd make them run the skill steps again and again and again, and and let them have a win, and then they run off. And it took the fear out of handling the difference. It made them think about, how do I change this and make them realize they need to care about this. So I love that you did that with your daughter, man. That's important. Teaching them how to think like that. Let's see here. Don says the semantics around the Ukrainian war are really important. The media is driving the support for Ukraine, despite all of the criminal activity and despotic controls Zelensky is imposing. All of the Western nations are being rah-rahed into draining their military and monetary reserves for the sake of, quote, democracy, even though they're not practicing it. And Will Parker says, "You will live forever." And the reference there is the drill instructor, is like, "Hey, Marines die. That's what we're here for. But the Corps lives forever, which means you will live forever." That's an interesting set of brainwashing.
Change the language to Japanese, you change a couple of words here and there, and guess what? You've got Bushido.
That's right.
This is not new. This is not rocket science.
Yeah. I've got two more, and then we'll close it out today. Thank you so much for being on. This one is interesting. NPR CEO, and I used to love NPR. I mean, I was a huge NPR fan. My radio was just tear the knob off and keep it on NPR. But my God, where they have gone today. And this is a classic example of it, Dr. Fuller. I'm not sure if you saw this. Elon Musk says your tax dollars should not fund lies. And I actually watched this entire clip just to make sure this wasn't taken out of context. But NPR CEO Catherine Maher said, quote, "Truth is a distraction from getting things done," end quote. And it's like, what in the holy hell is she talking about?
Newspeak, baby. Go back and reread 1984.
Mm-hmm.
That pesky Constitution keeps getting in the way. And it's so funny to me that people on the left are constantly accusing people on the right of, oh, you're going to violate the Constitution, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. But I keep hearing people on the left wanting to change it, alter it, get it out of the way. It's impeding us. Truth is a distraction from getting things done. And she's not wrong, right?
It is, isn't it? Damn.
You can't say she's wrong, but you can say that that's terrifying. Right. That a person with that level of control over a major media outlet, that is it fair to say it's a left-leaning outlet?
It certainly is now.
Yeah, and which is really sad, because I'm with you. I used to listen to it all the time, and I just can't do it anymore because it's such extremist propaganda to this point that I can't get behind it anymore. I like my news. I think I'm a product of, like you, of my childhood, where the news, I didn't have yellow journalism, right? I was born too late for that. Mm-hmm. And if you go back and look, even in the Revolutionary War days, right? Newspapers were blatantly extremist on their support, right? Yeah. But when we were kids, right, the most trusted man in America
Walter Cronkite
was Walter Cronkite, mm-hmm. Because he didn't come out there, and he certainly had opinions, mm-hmm. but you had to really, really hunt through his newscasts mm-hmm. to find them, because he was good about saying, this is what happened. And then we had a 2-minute blurb at the end of each news show, his 30-minute news show, where you got the editorial opinions of the management, mm-hmm. right? But other than that, you just got the news. We don't have that anymore. And now it's to the point where the head of NPR can come out and say, hey, the truth is distracting. Let's not burden people with things like the truth. Let's make their decisions for them and force feed it to them. And if we say it often enough, as Goebbels taught us in World War II, you repeat it a lie repeated often enough becomes the truth. We just got to, beat the table long enough, and people will regurgitate, especially if you have a society that's been educated since birth not to critically think, but to accept that which is told them by those in authority. And if you're got people who are told not only to not critically think, but you don't teach them how to critically think, mm-hmm. so they don't even have the capacity to critically think, then what choice do they have but to adopt whole cloth that which is fed to them? And I'm talking about right or left. I'm not saying that one side is any more guilty of this than the other. I'm saying that this is a bad thing for us as a nation.
Yes. No, I agree with you. I mean, that when I saw that and I watched the entirety of her talk, to make sure the context was appropriate, what she's saying, and she was even had something to do with Wikipedia. Like, we need to make sure that Wikipedia has a slant so that we can get more things done, because people tend to read Wikipedia and da. And I'm like, my God, it's to your point. You mentioned there was 2 articles that we talked about on the show, one from the New Yorker and one from, I can't remember the other, mainstream media, but it was talking about how this outdated document, this pesky old document called the Constitution, is getting in the way of politics. It's supposed to get in the way of politics. That's its job, to get in the way of politics. And that's what she's saying. It's truth is impeding getting things done. Like, getting what things done?
Yeah.
Your things done? Who makes you the arbiter of right and wrong?
And that is a question that far too often people don't ask. I have my opinions, and sometimes they're left of center, sometimes they're right of center. And I'm always very, very clear. I said, look, it is a good thing I am not emperor, right? It's a good thing that I am not in charge, because I would do things the way I want them done, in the way that makes sense to me, and the way I think is right. Well, that's great. But I'm self-aware enough to understand that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right decision for 375 million people in this country. So I think you need to have enough sense of self to be able to realize, if you're in these political positions, look, I'm going to try to do the best, but this needs to be a committee decision, because this is too impactful for just me to dictate what's going to happen. And clearly she is in a position where she thinks that I know best. I am all-knowing, and I think that the facts should be what I say they are, not what they actually are.
And if you watch the presentation, there's images of herself back behind her. I mean, it's like a Steve Jobs presentation. She's got the white T-shirt on, the black T-shirt on, and she's speaking with authority, and it just comes across as this pompous, elitist bullshit that I think a lot of Americans have had enough of. And then to hear her say this, like, you live off taxpayer funding, sweetheart. Now, Rich Brown and others, back in the day, I would give money to NPR, because I enjoyed the content and I was happy to fund it. Now I wouldn't give them a nickel. And Craig says, that's what's going on in the UK right now, man. You want to see where the end game is? Watch what's going on now. They're blocking native born Britons. I don't know a polite way to say it. Heritage stock Britons. I don't know, without using the W word, white Britons, from going into certain stores, because there's a lot of
well, they might be offending somebody.
They don't want to offend anybody, so you can't come in. Like, what? And it's not just happening in London; it's happening in a lot of other places. And I love the UK. I mean, I know you do too. And
I was just going
back. And I was there a few months ago, as you were, and I'm planning on going back in 2026. But I will get nowhere near England proper. I'm going to stay in Northern Ireland and Scotland, which is still kind of on the fringes of the empire, if you will. But you
sleep well, because they're talking about charging foreigners for saying the wrong thing on social media.
If that becomes the case, I will. Obviously, that's a wrap. I ain't going. And they talked. Yeah, you're right. They're like, hey, we can come extradite you. Well,
yeah. And honestly, I mean, the way our current laws are set up, if somebody indicts you in England and they push it, they put out a red notice on you and they push it over to the U.S., American authorities come get you, buckle you up, and ship your ass over to England to face charges. You like to hope that wouldn't happen, but it's certainly possible under the current laws.
Yeah, and maybe not under a Trump administration, but that's just 4 years. After that, who knows?
What are you in for? Triple homicide. What are you in for? I said that the current British Prime Minister was a doofus.
Mm-hmm. Really?
On social media, and it went viral. So now you're
Craig says that's why I can't say it on here. Yeah, no, you can't. Be careful, please. Tommy Robinson, who's kind of leading that movement, they locked his ass up. And any grandma that dares speak out against the current regime, and it's heartbreaking to see it happen. But that's where these policies go.
Yeah. So it should be a cautionary tale for us, but in far too many people, it's a signpost. It's a directional signal. Hey, let's go that way. And
That's this woman right here. I'm sure she looks at UCAN's like, yeah, we need more of that. We need some of that here. Dr. Fuller, I don't really have much else. I skipped a couple of slides this morning just out of the brevity of time. I think we had so much more to talk about than some of the other distractions I might have put in front of you. So I just thank you so much for being on this morning.
Rich, it's always a pleasure. As I've said before, I really enjoy your audience. I enjoy interacting with you. And I always love being here because as we always talk about, you always say, the fight is coming. You got to be ready.